I saw my life going in three different directions. I was either going to get into the porn industry, I was going to go to prison, or I was going to die. I mean, all three were very real options for me. It's what happened to me in sobriety. That was what scared the shit out of me, because I was seeking attention from an emotionally and physically unavailable person, and I couldn't leave it. Having that new purpose, now there's been all these other gifts. I have no anxiety and depression. I don't suffer from OCD like I used to. I know how to say no and stand up for myself.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction, and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Ashley. Hi, and thank you for tuning into this new episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. I'm always keen to get fellows from all fellowships onto this pod to speak to us about their experience, and I'm really chuffed about today's guest. Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Silvio, for having me on your podcast. I'm really grateful to be here today. My name is Ashley S. I am from North Carolina in the United States. And I am very grateful to be a sober and emotionally recovered sex addict and Al-Anonic. I joined Sex Addicts Anonymous back in July of 2021. And by the grace of God, I have been sober, sexually sober from my most destructive behaviors since November 2nd of 2021. However, I did find myself back in step one in sobriety, as I've heard from a lot of people in the rooms. And so I'm here to kind of share my story about that today for the first time. And I surrendered to joining Al-Anon back in February 2023. And I would say, the miracle of my emotional sobriety and recovery began on September 23rd of 2023. So,
Right.
That's a little bit about me.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, right away, this is wonderful because it's somewhat outside of my comfort zone, but it also means that I'm likely to make silly mistakes and so on and so forth. So when I do, please forgive me, correct me, because I obviously I'm an alcoholic and a cocaine addict. And so while there's a lot of overlap, obviously, there's going to be whole areas that I'm not all that familiar with. So from the get-go, when I make mistakes, not if, but when I make mistakes, don't be shy.
Well, sounds good. I'm from the South here in the U.S., so I might have a little twang. You might not understand, so just pause me if there's
that's so good.
any language dialect barriers.
Yeah, that's great. So let's get going and let's talk about our question one, which is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
That's a great question. And I do want to clarify before I even answer that. I did not have like a very physically abusive childhood or go through a lot of trauma like I hear in the rooms. I had a quote unquote good childhood. However, there were a lot of things that did happen, a lot of emotional abuse that I went through. We'll just stick with 12 and below since we're talking about childhood here, that I do think formed who I am or some of the challenges that I've been through and, led to my addiction. So the first thing that I think of is that I was an only child and I grew up just feeling like I never fit in. I spent a lot of time alone and that led to a lot of isolation later on. And one of my coping mechanisms was always being invisible. That was my superpower, not being seen. The other couple major of events that I think of is my mom was a twin sister, and both my mom and my aunt got cancer within a month of each other when I was 5. And so from 5 to 7, that was all I can think of is it was just one big time of cancer. And I basically went through a lot of abandonment during that time. I was being passed around to friends, family friends, neighbors, people who could take care of me because my entire family was so absorbed with taking care of my mom and my aunt. And a little bit about my parents. My dad, I went through a lot of emotional abandonment with my dad. Like I said, my caveat at the beginning, I had a good dad. He did the best he could, but I don't think he knew how to raise a daughter and how to be there for me or be interested in things I was interested in, things like that. But my mom, on the other hand, was very abusive emotionally. I was always in fear about upsetting her. She was, like the big book describes, she is the Jekyll and Hyde. I was always trying to people please with her, and I had to be perfect with everything that I did, the way I dress, the way I talk, school, church, you name it. It was instilled in me very early on. I had to be like number one at everything. And another thing is like I felt guilty for my basic needs, like my clothing or anything that required money. And I was spoken for and told how I felt or what I needed. From simple things like if I said I had to go to the bathroom, it's you don't have to go to the bathroom. You don't need that. And so that was constantly reinforced, like what I think and what I feel doesn't matter. And so why I mention all of that is it absolutely showed up in my relationships. The guys that I dated were just, and the one I ended up marrying was just like my mom. And then the last thing I'll just say, because I don't want to spend too much time on this question, is I had a very low self-esteem in childhood. My mom didn't take me to the doctor, and so I have a thyroid disease, and that didn't get diagnosed until I was 12. So I was gaining weight like crazy from 7 to 12, and overweight, braces, growing faster than other girls were at the time. So physically, I was a wreck. And so that just led to, again, it reinforced like the isolation, not fitting in, and the low self-esteem. So when I think about my childhood, it's a lot of that, a lot of abandonment and just low self-esteem.
The first thing that comes to mind is the fact that you caveated this by saying that you had a good childhood, and then obviously, who am I to disagree?
Yeah.
But,
go. Sorry, don't mean to.
Yeah, no, that's right. And income, quite a lot of, in and of themselves, really difficult things, right? The fact that your mother was ill together with your aunt, the fact that you're being, as you said, passed around, using your words. But there's a lot of stuff that is happening. There's a lot of stuff that is going on there. And then the physical thing as well, of course, with, I'm using your words again, being a wreck. So there's a lot of things going on. And the other thing that comes to mind, or the question that comes to mind, is, was there an overriding feeling? And let me try to explain what I mean by that. I grew up in a very loud household. Okay. Italians, yelling, drama, doors banging.
Yep.
Right? My father, bless his heart, had a lot of spiritual illness within him, right? And you never knew when he'd fly off the handle.
Yeah.
He beat my sister. He sometimes beat me. So for me, what I took away from all of this was I was constantly afraid. Mm-hmm. And another thing was that I was, I withdrew into myself, into music and then when I was able to read into books, because it is a way of shutting out the world. So there was fear and I suppose isolation are the words.
Yep.
If you had to sum this up for yourself, which is a very different experience, of course, but what were those overriding feelings then for you?
I'm not a feelings person. I'm kidding. No, I've learned how to sit with my feelings. But from all of that I went through in my childhood, the other coping mechanism I learned was to go numb. I could turn off any feeling. And so that obviously didn't serve me very well in the long run. But the overall feeling was that I was never good enough. I don't know if there's an exact feeling for that, but that was my takeaway. I always had to be fighting for dad's attention and for mom's love and acceptance. I just couldn't be who I was. It was never good enough.
Mm. Did you have any brothers and sisters? I know you said you were an only child.
Only
obviously,
child.
that contributed to that. Yes, of course. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I think the reason why I often ask this question is the way we relate to people around us obviously makes quite a big difference. But the next question that I like to ask, usually in that vein, is how this impacted your school. So, here you are. You've got quite a few. You've got a lot of stuff going on there, as we were saying. So, school could have been a place where you go and you get away from it, or it could be a place where it gets to be worse. What was it?
School is where I shined. So teachers was where I got my love and attention from, because I was always the top student. Like I didn't end up being valedictorian of my class. I came in 13th, which is a long story maybe we'll get into, but again, there was always that desire for me to be number one. And if I wasn't, I was crushed because I felt like I wasn't good enough. That's where that perfectionism was instilled in me. But yes, when I got, the 100 or whatever, the best project or whatever it was in class, that's where I got my approval and what felt like my needs were getting met at the time.
Mm-hmm. You speak about it like someone who's done a lot of work on this. We'll get to that a bit later, but you speak about this with such clarity. Just had a brainwave. If any psychologist or so were listening, they must have had a field day with us in the first 10 minutes. But
I've done a lot of work, inner child work, the steps through the big book, A Course in Miracles, Drop the Rock. So there's plenty of things that I've done in my couple of years in recovery.
How lovely, amazing.
Yeah.
So our question 2 is, and let me caveat that right away because it's a question I usually ask alcoholics and drug addicts. So we're going to tweak it, but perhaps we can tweak it together.
You might not have to.
All right. Okay, good. So our question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked, what did the fun times look like? Now, I appreciate for people with perhaps certain behaviors and so on, it may not actually be that. It may just be that it could be a behavior that does something for you that you can't do for yourself. But, let's hear your answer.
Oh, I know immediately what it is, because I think for an alcoholic, you can tell me if I'm wrong, you remember your first drink or for the first time it gave you that feeling, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Oh, of course. I know what that is for me as a sex addict. I was 12 years old, and it was the first time that I looked at soft porn. And that did for me what alcohol does for the alcoholic. Once I got that, it was, I want more of this. This feels good. This is taking me or helping me escape from all of the craziness that's going around. And I can even remember my mom and my grandmother were just in the other room. Yeah. So that's where I first got hooked, so to speak. But then I could just, see my behaviors progressing. It wasn't just soft porn. It was chat rooms. It was, having sex obsessively and compulsively. All those other steps, they were the first time to, I'm getting hooked with this new behavior. Yeah. And I just kept seeking, more and more of that.
Mm-hmm. And what did it give you? I mean, for me, for instance, I'm first and foremost an absolute and total cocaine addict, or stimulants really, right? So anything that is crystal meth or speed, pills, anything that is amphetamines and cocaine. So when I ingest cocaine or any of those, there is a certain sense of relief that comes with it. I'm just like, oh
exactly.
My God. And is it a similar experience for you?
I was going to say it is a breath of fresh air, or it was.
Yeah.
Caveat, it was a breath of fresh air until it started creating problems.
But there was a time where there weren't any problems, I'm hearing. So for a little while, it must have been a good time. I'm watching this porn. It's fun. I mean, I watched porn when I was, 13, 14, and so on and so forth. So
sure.
There was clearly was there a sense of shame at this point or not at all?
Yes. I grew up in a very religious household. So Southern Baptist, went to church every single Sunday with my parents. And we were second row Southern Baptist.
Right.
You got to be real, on your game if you're going to sit on the second row. But no, I mean, I was told like very early on, never drink alcohol, never watch porn, those kinds of things. And yes, I remember the first time that I watched porn and the first time I masturbated. It was, I shouldn't be doing this. Like I do remember that inner voice being there, but I did it anyway and it felt good. And it was like, screw that inner voice or that guilt and shame. And I just stuffed it down for 15 years.
Right.
Yep.
Which is a considerable amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm very blessed that I came into a 12-step fellowship when I was 27. There are a lot of us. I would say it's probably not the majority, but there are a lot of us, But if I may, I do want to talk about the other side of my disease as well.
Yes, please.
Because my codependency. Attention also does for me what alcohol does for the alcoholic. So once I get that little bit in, with a guy, all it can take is just a text like, hey, and I mean, boom, it's like I can feel it in my body. I mean, there's been research that's done on this. It's the chemicals in your brain. It's oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin. So, I mean, I know that I'm literally powerless over neurochemical surges that are happening in my brain.
That's a good combo, that. Powerful stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And if you don't mind, could you expand a bit on the attention and how it impacted you? When was the first time that you started noticing this? Or was it just all kind of related and a big ball of confusing emotions maybe until you were able to pick those things apart?
I do think like attention is definitely what drove my sex addiction and the codependency. They are two sides of the same coin, but it's what happened to me in sobriety. That was what scared the shit out of me. Is that I was working a program, but I was finding myself powerless and my life was unmanageable because I was seeking attention from an emotionally and physically unavailable person. And I couldn't leave it. I couldn't say no. I couldn't get out of that toxic relationship.
Right. Now, if we're looking at, one of the characteristics of our disease, of course, is the progression. So if I look at not just the amounts that I used and drank, but also the frequency, and then it got ever more difficult, and then I'm up 24 hours and 48 hours and so on and so forth. I mean, it was an S-curve for me, first and foremost, but also an absurdity curve, right? Where it just got to the point where it's just madness, plain insanity. Mm-hmm. So let's talk, if you don't mind, about your progression from that moment when you were 12 to perhaps the moment you got into the rooms.
Yeah. The big book says with women, sometimes like in a couple of years, they're farther gone than the men are. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I just noticed that like I didn't need to have a new person every day kind of thing, but the men that I was with, I was having sex with them obsessively and compulsively. I see now, like it was to numb, to escape, to repress fear and resentment, whatever it was. I mean, I used everything as an excuse, but where I can see like the absolute worst behaviors for me is that I became a sadomasochist. I started that lifestyle of BDSM when I was 17. And that led to, I was married. I'm no longer married to that person now, but with my ex-husband, we began swinging and having, open relationship, and we went to strip clubs We went to sex clubs together. It's crazy that I say this out loud, but like I would be with my husband and I was trying to seduce another man when he was just sitting across from me. I mean, that is crazy to say that out loud. And also my exhibitionism and posting things online. I say all the time, like I saw my life going in 3 different directions. I was either going to get into the porn industry, I was going to go to prison, or I was going to die. I mean, all 3 were very real options for me. So that was the worst of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, around that time, awareness klaxon. I always ask this question at this point. What was your awareness around this? I mean, did any of your partners ever say to you, like, look, I love having sex with you, or I'm in love with you, or any of the things that people would say, but this is getting too much? Did anybody ever say that?
My ex-husband did, yeah. I remember we were in college because I met him when I was 18, and we were together from 18 till, what's 18 plus 9? 27, yeah. 27. We were together from 18 to 27, and I remember I was in my college dorm room, and I had sex with him 8 times that day, and he wasn't wanting to have sex with me. I was forcing him. I mean, I realize now, like, I was raping him. And so, yeah, like he was pointing out, like, Ashley, this just isn't normal. And I agree with him now looking back, but at the time it was like, what are you talking about? What guy would have a problem with a woman wanting to come on to him?
I mean, there's so much wrong with that sentence on so many levels, but I completely see what you're saying. And, the book always says, doesn't it, that to the alcoholic,
it's the normal life.
Their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. So in that vein, of course you would be thinking that. Yeah.
Exactly.
So there was no awareness for you there. Sorry, go on.
Oh, no. I thought that most couples participated in BDSM. I thought that was normal. Because that was the first person I ever had sex with was into that. And so therefore I apply that to every relationship I had after that.
And this is a judgment-free podcast, so I don't think that we are trashing BDSM as a concept. And people are, of course, free to do whatever they like and enjoy themselves in whichever way they see fit. But for you, the problem was it fed into something that is so dark it can kill you. So
absolutely.
It's important. Yeah, it's important, I think, to point that out.
Exactly. It's just like anything else. I mean, a non-addict can have a glass of wine and enjoy that, and it'd be okay.
Yeah, I
just
see
like
that
I'm
sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, just like, enjoying a donut. Not everybody's a food addict. Some people can watch porn for 10 minutes or whatever, and they're good, but that's not me. I have an allergy to lust. Once I intake it in, I can't stop, and I can't stay stopped.
Yeah. Before we get to question 3, slightly off script here, do you think that being from a religious background amplified the problem?
I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that. I do feel like, okay, yes. Because my mother would always say things like, God is watching you. God knows when you're lying. And when she would say that, I would use that as justification to go and act out or to do things that I wanted to do.
Sure.
So if that answers your question, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of does. I mean, what I mean by that is that if you're coming from a sort of fairly strict religious background, often that means that especially your sexual behavior, not only, but especially your sexual behavior is monitored more than from those people who come from less religious backgrounds, and perhaps also judged less, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. That's really the only thing that comes to mind. I think, I don't know, I was just very lost in my disease. I really didn't care.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it boils down to.
Yeah, and that, sounds very familiar to me, albeit in a different way, but it's very much the same. Our question 3 is, What were your worst consequences? And finally, your rock bottom, if you had such a thing.
Oh, yes. I don't know an addict who doesn't have a rock bottom. But when I was 17, I attempted suicide. And that's crazy to me to say out loud. Like, I was that young and I was already so depressed and miserable that I wanted to take my life. I had lost my senior class presidency. You know how like Bill talks about, Bill's a lust addict. He's not just sexual lust, but he lusts over power and being number one, being the leader of a vast enterprise. That's why I so relate to Bill Wilson just as much as I relate to Lois Wilson as well. But that senior class presidency to me at the time was the number one thing in my life. You know, that's where I got my attention and my approval. And long story short, my principal found out that I was having a relationship with a married man. And she took that away from me. And it was just like, you can't speak at graduation. And I don't want to get in, too graphic or into too many details, but I went home and I got my dad's gun. And thank God I didn't pull the trigger. But it was pretty bad. So that was kind of the first really rough time that I went through because I spent a week in a mental hospital. And fast forward to age 27, or even throughout that time, from 17 to 27, I lost 2 jobs because of my acting out. I was too busy acting out during the workday that, I couldn't be present for my job. That's why I lost one of them. And I got fired for sexual harassment at the other one.
Right.
And
you're chuckling here. It's
I'm chuckling.
You must be quite far away from that, like a distant memory, I suppose.
It just doesn't seem like the same person. Like all of this, that I lived all of these things. That's what's crazy to me. Because I other parts of the powerlessness and the unmanageability in my life. I had $100 in my bank account. That was all I had to my name at one point. And I am a college-educated woman. I had a good job. My husband at the time had a good job. Why do we only have $100? It's because I was overspending. I didn't have any financial peace because I'm running around burning up energy foolishly, like the book says. Anyway, other parts. You asked me, what was the rock bottom? So the rock bottom was on the very same day, mind you. My husband at the time found out that I was cheating on him, and I lost my job. And that's when I became suicidal.
Another job loss due to your addiction?
Mm-hmm. And and again, imagine one of those things is bad enough, but both of those things happened on the very same day. And so, I was suicidal because, how am I going to live through this? He's going to leave me. He's going to divorce me. All those thoughts that come in your head. But I knew at that point, I wanted help for myself. It wasn't to save the marriage, to keep him. I knew then something's got to change because my life is pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
And I can't keep living like this.
Yeah. So was that the moment, I suppose, where you stopped blaming other people? Oh, the people at work, they're just so this, so that, they don't understand, they're so square, whatever it is. The moment where you sort of take it on yourself, kind of go, no, this is actually my own problem. I'm owning it.
100%. I feel like I do feel like I am at least aware enough that I know when I've messed up and I can take accountability for that. And so I started doing all the things that I thought were the right things to do. I got myself my own therapist. I wanted to try couples therapy. That didn't go so well, but maybe we'll talk about that. Because it takes 2 to want to make it work.
Yeah, well, yes.
I tried medication. I tried getting a neuropsychiatrist. Thank God one of those therapists told me, you should look at Sex Addicts Anonymous. And that's how I got into recovery. But I was putting in the work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was that
yes.
Yeah. It was the first time that you heard the concept even of sex addiction.
Yes. It was shocking because I remember to this day, it was like a 20 question, thing that you answered. And I was like, oh my God, I'm 18 or 19 of these things of the 20. I can't believe that there is like actually a term for what is going on with me. But I can't tell you the amount of like relief and like what that feeling was like, because I knew like I'm not crazy. Like I can get help for this thing.
It's interesting, isn't it? And this might just be perhaps a moment to talk about the different stigmas that are attached to maybe cocaine addiction and versus sex addiction. Now, out there in the world, which is the point that we're speaking about, when we start learning about our own addiction and about our own condition, right? And out there in the world, I suppose, for cocaine addicts, there might be people who very quickly think, well, it's a drug, it's a terrible thing, you can die from it, and so on and so forth. There might be others who might think, oh, well, sounds like a rock star or a movie star kind of life. It sounds at least interesting. Right. And I'm quite aware that I'm pushing the boat out a little bit here. But let's just go there for a second. But for sex addiction, I'm assuming, and I'd love to get your message on this, sex addiction, perhaps is even more difficult for some people to get their heads around, because in and of itself, we can't live as a race without sex. And, most people like sex and so on and so forth. So talk to us a little bit about, this would perhaps be the right moment, about this. About the stigma around sex addiction, the fact that maybe a lot of people don't even know it exists.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
I don't think a lot of people understand that for food addicts and for sex addicts, it is harder to overcome our addiction, because an alcoholic can live without alcohol. Cocaine addict can live without cocaine. We can't live. Your body cannot live without food, and we can't live without people. We have to learn how to live with them. So, sex is like the big book says, it's a God-given power, and therefore it is good.
Yeah.
So healthy sexual intimacy is totally fine. It's when we perverse it and it's lustful. That's not so good, and that's what causes problems.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure if I answered your question, but that was my initial thoughts.
I think you very much did. Again, I am quite aware that, by speaking about a particular kind of stigma and so on and so forth, we're taking it ever so slightly away from the big book and ever so slightly away from the 12 steps. It is just still, interesting sometimes to put a little bit of context around this about how is it that maybe it took you so long to even understand that what you were suffering from was an actual bona fide addiction, a sex addiction. And that's where that.
And actually, that made me think of something. So I think it's even harder for women. Some women might have had a different experience from me, but I'm going to tell you my experience in North Carolina was I was passed around to 3 different therapists. The one before each one said, I can't help you. Your case is too serious. I can laugh about it now, but the last one told me, you really should get into a sex treatment center. Wow. And the process for that was nearly impossible, because all of the centers that were in or around North Carolina, guess who they're for? They're just for men. They're not for women. Or the ones that were for women were $50,000. I don't know who has $50,000 cash laying around, but I sure didn't. And my family sure wasn't about to pay for it either.
No. Did they know? Your family? Did they know?
Oh, yes. I knew nothing about the 12 traditions and not talking about your disease. And I was in a really bad place, and they knew that my husband and I were separating, and they wanted to know why. And without knowing any better, I gave them way too many details that they shouldn't have known. But at least I was trying to get help. I was doing the best that I could at the time.
Yeah.
So
and
yeah,
that usually leads to good results, albeit sometimes, we might do some things that we regret later, but generally it does lead to the right. It does lead us to the solution. Yeah.
It does, because that's what forced me. I say forced. It forced me to use the steps. I had my very first sponsor. She's like, Ashley, you don't need to worry about going to the treatment center. Just work the steps. And she was right. She was absolutely right.
We'll come to that in a moment. Our question 4, and you've already answered it, but let's just go there very quickly one more time. And I will caveat this very quickly as well. When we speak about suicide and suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, it is because we talk about the place that this illness will take us if we don't address it, if we don't find a solution for it. And if you're in that place right now, please reach out to anyone and get the help that is there for you. Our question for Ashley is, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide?
Several times. I told you about the time when I was 17.
Yes.
That was a very real. I went to a mental hospital because of it.
Yeah.
When my husband found out I was cheating on him was the second time. I mean, I felt like a worthless piece of shit. Who does this to their husband and just can't stop? Even after he found out that I was cheating, I kept talking or texting the guy I was having an affair with. I couldn't stop. What kind of monster does this? So yes, I was suicidal then. And the next time was in sobriety. And that was where I was in this toxic relationship. I couldn't leave it. And it was like, he was married. He was totally unavailable. I had no business being with this guy. But, I mean, he was giving me the attention and the approval that I needed. And, when we were together, it was like, well, it felt good to have that little bit, it's kind of like breadcrumbs. But I couldn't be fully happy because I couldn't have him fully because he was married.
Let's slow this down for a second, if you don't mind. So
sure.
You are already at this point in recovery for sex addiction.
Yep.
And you're still with this person
who
is unavailable, who's married.
Yep.
Would you consider, forgive me if I'm asking the wrong question perhaps, but would you consider this breaking your sobriety then, your sexual sobriety?
This was totally new to me because this was just an emotional relationship. This time we never had sex up until this point. And so I had never been through this kind of thing before. It was also long distance. So this was just a totally different ball game. And that's why I joined Al-Anon at the time. It was essentially, I remember my reasoning was, I just kind of need to know how to live with him better. So we don't have as many problems. But I think I knew in the back of my mind, no, it's so that I can actually leave this guy because I can't be honest. And we don't need to be together. It's obviously not going to go anywhere with him being married. So,
yeah. And it's, at least looking at it from an outsider's point of view, it is a strange relationship, as in, you're not interacting physically, and, he's married to someone else, and last but not least, he lives far away. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, it seems normal to the addict. And you can justify, or I justified and rationalized it all. That's the insanity, as I say it back now. I mean, that I really thought, I am so committed to him as he is to me, and I could just totally overlook his wife. That, to me, that's insanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Our question 5. What other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms? Did you moderate, for instance, or try to?
I tried my hardest. My mom, there was a couple of things my mom forced me to do at the time. She wanted me to see a church counselor. I remember us writing down some prayers on a note card that I was supposed to say throughout the day. I tried several Bible studies and things like that, like going and participating more in church. That didn't work. Like I said, I tried seeing a therapist, but there's, 7 days a week, 24 hours in a day. So that leaves us, if you see a therapist 1 hour a week, that leaves us with another 167 hours. What am I supposed to do? That was always my thing is, what am I supposed to do without you? I have no tools. And so, I tried couples therapy with my husband at the time. I tried medication. And then there was a bunch of things I tried once I got into 12-step recovery. So like I said, I came into Sex Addicts Anonymous first. So I remember making bottom lines or circles, whatever you want to call them. I went to retreats that they had. And Sex Addicts Anonymous, they want you to create an inner circle, which would be like imagine 3 rings or 3 circles. And in the inner circle are all the healthy things like, going for a walk or, talking to your sponsor, healthy things to promote your recovery. The middle circle would be things that are not a relapse, but are leading you to a relapse. So for me, that would be like going to search on Google for porn or something like that. The outer circle or the bottom line would be the things that qualify as a relapse. So, going to a sex club or whatever it is, that was on my list. What was your question?
Well, while we're here, just ever so slightly off script, and for those people who don't know, does everyone in your fellowship define their own sobriety terms, so to speak? It's much easier, of course, with alcohol and drugs. You can't have any of them forever, full stop. Much different, of course, for food and sex. So do you define your own sobriety, or is it given through the fellowship, perhaps?
In SAA, yes, you do define your own sobriety. So what that looked like for me, and it's also my Al-Anon, they're different. I can go into depth with this, but the one that's the most important one for me is I do not have any emotional or physical relationships outside of my committed relationship. That is paramount. My Al-Anon sobriety would be if I ever find myself in a unhealthy, toxic relationship, I leave that immediately. But yeah, there's a lot more. For my sex addiction, it would be participating in BDSM, casual and anonymous sex, public sex, all those kinds of things are on my list in order to be sober. I remember when I first came in, I did this with a sponsor. Like she asked me, what are the behaviors, that are giving you the most problems? I wrote that down on a list. We went over it together. And that's, where I have my own definition of sobriety today.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. It's important to qualify this, I think, and simply because it isn't so black and white as it is with drink and drugs, of course. Our question 6, and this is going to be interesting, I think, is, did you struggle when you came into the rooms with the word God?
This one is pretty simple for me. So growing up as Baptist, going to church, I believed that God existed. I believed in Jesus Christ. I just never had a relationship with God. I didn't practice any of the things that I was listening. It was like going back to my childhood and like feeling like I didn't fit in. I would listen to my peers and the way that they talked about God and the relationship that they have with Jesus, it was like, you sound like you're from another planet. It just didn't make sense to me. And I didn't know how to get where they were. So did I have a problem with the word God? No. The book talks about this. Our problem is not sex or alcohol. The problem is that we have been unplugged from power. And so the steps are to help us plug back into our source. And that's exactly what happened for me. So now I have a totally new relationship with God that I never thought was possible.
So in a way, perhaps it's right to say that you were agnostic.
Yes.
Even though you were actually, a churchgoer.
Yes, that's exactly. Immediately, one of the first things I saw as we read We Agnostics, I had no problem saying, yes, that's me. I've totally been agnostic this whole time. Never an atheist, but definitely an agnostic.
It's interesting, I think, because there's a good reason, of course, why this question is in here, because I did struggle with the word God. No surprise to anyone. And but I find it always so interesting to hear people who come from really religious backgrounds and, second row Baptists here. I mean, that's as close to fame, I suppose, as you can get. And at the same time, we are actually, you and I, came into the rooms of recovery, more or less, with the same mindset, I speak of close-heartedness, speaking about my own experience, of course, only, because it's not even that I wasn't open-minded enough. I wasn't open-hearted enough to let in anything beyond my small conception of creation, God, and so on and so forth. So I find it so intriguing that although you come from a totally different background than I do, we'd come in with more or less the same agnosticism or a similar level of agnosticism.
Yep. It's not uncommon. I hear it a lot, but, lots of people I sponsor a lot of Muslim women, and I've sponsored Catholics and any denomination you can think of.
Sure.
And I find it all the time.
Yeah. Question 7 is, how do you experience your higher power, your God moments, maybe?
From the moment I wake up until the moment I go to sleep. So I've learned that, well, first off, I don't believe I have to die in order to meet God. See, the book says, see where religious people are right. It doesn't say that religious people are right. So that's what I heard or was told in church all the time. One of these days, when you die, you're going to meet God. Are you ready? I mean, that's what I grew up with. But I have learned that the kingdom of heaven is within. The big book says on page 55, the great reality is deep down within us.
Every man, woman, and child, yes.
Yes. And even in, lost my train of thought, even in spiritual experience in the back of the book, it says that this is an inner resource. This is not something that is outside of us or up there and far away from me. So my sponsor was so great at giving me these nuggets that just were aha moments. So then I was able to start seeing God every day, everywhere, and everything that I was doing. What was crazy to me is that I had been asleep to it the entire time. I just couldn't see it. So to give you an example, like I'm here in my house right now, I'm looking out my window. I see the sky, there's tree, there's grass, my cat's here beside me, there's tons of nature. And the spirit that is in all those things is the same spirit that's in me. There's no separation. And so I've learned, like, I am one with all of these things. And that's how I stopped objectifying men in particular, was to be able to see that I am one with them. I'm no better, no less than. They are the light of God, just like I am.
There's no subject-object relationship there anymore.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And other ways that I experience God. So I've learned God is not in the past. God is not in the future. God is in the present. So I can pull myself back into the present moment when I find myself, drifting, like the book says, into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection. If I'm worried about what's going on in the future, worried, self-pity in the past, I can pull myself back to the present moment, and I know I'm aligned with God's will. But the last nugget I'll leave is, my sponsor explained, or somebody offered it to me, that every time you see the word God in the big book, replace it with love. And so I started thinking about that every time, if God is love and love is God, every time I experience love, like with my partner, with my friends and my family, I'm experiencing God. That goes for everything else, all the other fruits of the Spirit, like forgiveness, patience, kindness. So now I'm more aware, oh shit, God is actually everywhere and in everything. I didn't realize it. I didn't have my spiritual eyes to see it.
Yeah, we were blind to it in that state. Yep. Absolutely. Just wondering how this would have changed the question 6. Did you struggle with the word love? And how odd that sounds. And no one would kind of go, well, I mean, I'm sure someone would say, but it would entirely change quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah, sure
absolutely.
Would. I think, it goes back to the childhood thing. When your parents say, I love you, but then their actions don't show that. For kids who grow up in violent homes where the parents beating on them, or like my mom with all the emotional abuse, if that's love, I don't want any of that. So, it was a relearning process of what healthy love looks like as well, especially in relationships.
Our next question is our question 8, which is, which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you? Now, let's make a choice perhaps. It'd be great if you made that choice, of course. Maybe you want to speak about it from the Al-Anon side, or maybe the sex addiction side. Entirely up to you, or both. I've got time.
The hardest one was honestly the Al-Anon one. I think about my experiences working the steps the first time with sex addiction. The steps are simple. They're not always easy, but they were very simple to me, and I followed them with all my heart and soul to the best of my ability. Going back through this for codependency and love addiction, or Al-Anonism, whatever you want to call it, that was so much harder, and it was steps 6 and 7, which I think is, I don't know if that's interesting to people.
It is to me.
But, it is to you, because
yes.
There's a book. It's called Drop the Rock, and I read it with my sponsor. It's about step 6 and 7.
Of course.
And my rock was the married guy. I could not drop the fucking rock. That was the hardest thing to me, because I had to trust, okay, I thought this was the best thing in my life, God. And if it's not, I just thought at the time, like, who else could he send me? Or God, I don't know why I just said he. Who else could God send me that is going to be better than this man that I'm with? Like, oh, ye of little faith. But it wasn't until I finally let the guy go. I blocked him. I said no, and I meant it, and I stood up for myself. I let it go. And then life started to change drastically for the better after that. But it was the hardest thing to get to that point. I mean, I could not let that guy go up until inventory.
Those levels of surrender that come sometimes after a while that we've been sober, right? Either surrendering to a different part of our condition, like you were, or to behaviors in sobriety, in my sobriety, that were just so incredibly unhelpful. I held on to resentments against my father for way, way longer than I should have. And it was so hard, but once that level of surrender comes and you say, I'm ready to put this down, drop that rock, what does occur is really miraculous, no two ways about it.
It is. It was like an overnight change. Everything. I started watching miracles pop up. Side note, I'm a student of the Course of Miracles, and so I can see miracles in different ways on a daily basis if you look for them. But it was just so many things started happening for the better. I got a better job that I absolutely love. It's the one that I'm in now. I literally have a notebook, and it's called God's Miracle List, and I just keep track of it. And so, I can't sit there and rattle off all the things that have happened since January, but oh my gosh, it was just amazing to watch. Like, just keep trusting God and carrying this message, and all the promises will come true.
Mm-hmm. Do you step 9 promises, you mean?
Oh no, there's promises with every step in the book. So
no, of course, but most people, when we speak of the promises, we mean the step 9 promises.
No, I'm talking about all of them.
Wow.
From
okay.
Step 3, step 10. They're everywhere. So, Yeah.
What was the name of the book?
Well, there's a couple we've talked about, but A Course in Miracles?
No, the other one that you just mentioned after that.
Oh, I'm talking about the big book, like having promises in step 3.
But didn't you just say that you had a book, God's book, miracle book, something like that, where you're taking...
Oh, yeah. So I've just got a journal. It's actually my nightly review journal. And at the back of that, the very last page, I've got what's called God's Miracle List.
Right, okay. And so where you write down what we probably would call gold moments. Okay, right, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good to make a list of those. I mean, you don't really forget them, but it's by writing them down, you certainly make sure that you will never forget. It's just another way of cultivating that little plant called faith.
Exactly. So much trust. It's like, if I keep doing this, what else is going to happen? God shows up in big and small ways all the time.
Yeah. Question 9. Which character defects give you most trouble?
Fear. I think a lot of my character defects stem from like this one root. It's the fear of abandonment or the fear of rejection. Because people pleasing, because that is the number one thing for me. People pleasing is really just a fear of rejection. Perfectionism, again, is like that fear of rejectionism. So those are things that I struggle with. Also as a codependent, enabling, avoiding, having too high expectations for myself and others. I don't know if there's a better term for this, but this is literally like what I wrote down for my 6th step. I call it pride in reverse. I am great at being a doormat and not voicing my needs. So if you or somebody else has a better term for me, let me know.
I'm sure someone will have a better term, but or a different term. Not sure if it's better, because pride in reverse.
Pride in reverse. That's what I've called it all this time. But But the big one, it always goes back to like seeking attention, or needing that attention from others. Yeah.
Thank you. Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
It is, without a shadow of a doubt, purpose. That's the best thing. Up until 28, 27, I was never one of those children that knew what they wanted to do in life. Like my ex-husband, for example, he grew up since he was like 10 or 12 knowing that he wanted a career in baseball. His entire life was all around baseball. I just never had that one thing. I felt like I was kind of wandering around aimlessly. Like anything that I picked up, I was good at it, or I would, learn how to be the best at it. But I just didn't know what was my thing. And it wasn't until that I started sponsoring and carrying this message. Like, I know my purpose is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and to those around me. And I never expected that was going to happen in recovery, but it did. So with that, having that new purpose, now there's been all these other gifts. I have financial peace. I have no anxiety and depression. I don't suffer from OCD like I used to. I've got all these tools in my toolkit now. I know how to say no and stand up for myself. I've got friends. I've got better relationships with my family now than ever. I've got a stable job, one that I love. I've got physical healing. And probably the other things that are most important for me is, number one, is this feeling of being clean. And if you don't understand, I'll explain. Like, I have no secrets. I have no more amends to make. I live as honestly as I possibly can. And that, to me, it's like Bill says, like feeling like a mountaintop blue through and through. It's just feeling clean. Like, that's an indescribable feeling to me. And the other thing is, the big book promises, like, we are going to experience intimacy like never before. And that's exactly what I have now. I've got a very healthy, loving relationship that I'm in that I never thought would be possible. So, I mean, there's so many gifts, but those are just the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, quite a few there, I have to say.
Yeah.
I did not come to the rooms either to find purpose, right? I came to the rooms essentially because I came straight out of hospital, and I knew if I kept doing this, I'll die.
Yep.
There was also the fact that I would have liked, and I did, thankfully, keep my wife and a roof over my head and all those other things. So it was quite existential. And yet I did find purpose as well. And it is one of those things that comes when it comes, it's not just a breath of fresh air, but it is the air that you didn't know you needed. I find that so interesting that you find that you had really been looking, well, I can only speak for myself, of course, so let me roll that back a little bit. But, I found that I had been looking for that kind of a purpose all along and didn't have it in my life. I just didn't have it. And it came with sobriety. And it is certainly right up there when it comes to what makes recovery so very special. Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict? Now, you can take this from any kind of angle in terms of sex addiction or Al-Anon, either which way.
Well, they're different in my opinion. So what I would say to someone, if they're wondering if they're an addict, actually, I was reading with a new sponsee right before this podcast, and she asked me that question. Like, I'm not really sure if I'm an addict. And I asked her, the book is very simple. It gives us 2 drink tests or 2 sexaholic tests. On page 31, it says, we do not like to pronounce any individual as an alcoholic or a sex addict, but you can quickly diagnose yourself, step over to the nearest bar room, or, try and just engage in a friendship and start talking and end it abruptly, or, try some controlled drinking. And then try and, stop abruptly. Try it more than once. It won't take long for you to decide if you're honest with yourself about it. Maybe worth a bad case of jitters if you get a full knowledge of your condition. So drink test number 1 is, can I stop? And drink test number 2 is on page 34. And it says, try leaving liquor alone for 1 year. Try leaving a guy alone for 1 year. So basically, can I stay stopped? So if you can't leave the relationship or the booze or the food or whatever it is alone like that for 1 year, and you can't stop it abruptly, you might be an addict. So that was answer number 1 for someone who's wondering if they're an addict. What would I say to the newcomer? And I'm pulling from my own experience. So I think we've kind of glossed over this, but I'm a sex addict, but I absolutely love the Big Book. I went through the Big Book to work my steps. I sponsored through the Big Book. I wasn't getting what I needed from my fellowship that I first came into. And so I sought out a new sponsor. I sought out a new fellowship. I was willing to go to any lengths to recover from my addiction. I set aside every old idea, or tried to, set aside every old idea that I had from my parents, from my religion, from other people in the meetings, so that I could have a new experience and be happy, joyous, and free in my life. So my advice to the old timer or the newcomer is still be humble and open-minded enough that you don't know it all. I certainly do not know it all about this Big Book. There's still more to learn. God's constantly revealing more to me. So it's to stay humble and open-minded.
Wonderful. Question 12, our last question for today. What do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
I think we talked a little bit about this before, so I love your questions. This is the only one I have a slight issue with. But
yeah, go on.
Yeah, because again, I don't feel like I have to meet God, or I have to die in order to meet God. I believe, again, the kingdom of heaven is within. And like the Course in Miracle talks about, heaven and hell is a choice. If I choose recovery and staying in love and forgiveness, that is heaven to me. If I'm choosing addiction or selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, I'm choosing hell. So that's kind of my thoughts. But,
that's great.
Well, I was going to say the last thing, I mean, this is kind of going back to my Baptist roots, but I would just want God to say, well done, thy good and faithful servant. You've carried this message to the best of your ability.
Mm-hmm. Well, you certainly have carried a message today for our listeners. I'd like to thank you, Ashley. You were absolutely brilliant with your honesty and also with that incredible clarity that you bring to your conditions and to the big book knowledge that you have brought. It's been absolutely a privilege to speak to you today, and thank you for being my guest on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Thank you so much, Silvio. I have thoroughly enjoyed being here. I'm grateful for you, for the listeners, for our 12 steps, no matter what fellowship you're in. So God bless everyone who's listening today.
Indeed so. Thank you so much.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-step recovery program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.